Hello, this is video lecture number 36. Today we are covering Individualism, the ethic of the middle class. We only have two sections in this one. First, we're going to look at a man named Ralph Waldo Emerson and his idea of Transcendentalism. And then finally, we're going to look at Emerson's literary influence. So, the explosion of economic opportunity that manifested itself in the industrial and market revolutions and rapid expansion into the West weakened old social restraints and obligations and encouraged new visions of an ideal social order. To many Americans, especially among the middle-class beneficiaries of what seemed to be limitless economic opportunity, the restraints and obligations of the past seemed artificial and contrived. They searched for society's natural foundations, seeking principles that at once would secure the autonomy of the individual and define the individual's social responsibility in terms of his or her highest interests. Certain themes connected these enthusiastic crusades and suggest the ways in which middle-class radicalism influenced society in industrializing America. One of these themes was individualism. The faith of transcendentalist intellectuals such as Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau in the power of the individual to tap directly into natural and spiritual wisdom stood in sharp contrast to the forms of deference and coercion that still pervaded American life. Individualism and self-restraint required self-reliance and a capacity to distinguish what was necessary and good from all that was frivolous and distracting. It also required the absolute freedom of the individual to seek out the truth and to act upon it. It thus strongly implied, even required, radical assaults on all forms of domination, including those of masters over slaves and of men over women, whether in public or in the most intimate settings. So let's look at this individualism, the ethic of the middle class, starting with Ralph Waldo Emerson and Transcendentalism. The Reform movement reflected the social conditions and intellectual currents of American life. Alexis de Tocqueville coined the word individualism to describe the condition and values of both native-born white Americans. Ralph Waldo Emerson of New England was the leading spokesman for the idea of Transcendentalism. Emerson's vision influenced thousands of Americans and a generation of important artists that sparked the American Renaissance, which was a movement characterized by an outpouring of first-class novels, poetry, and essays. English Romantics and Unitarian radicals believed in an ideal world. To reach this deeper reality, people had to transcend the rational ways in which they normally comprehended the world. Emerson thought people were trapped in unquestioned and unexamined customs, institutions, and ways of thinking. Remaking themselves depended on their discovery of their original relation with nature. Emerson's genius lay in his capacity to translate vague ideas into examples that made sense to ordinary middle-class Americans. Emerson believed that all nature was saturated with the presence of God, and he criticized the new industrial society, predicting that it would drain the nation's spiritual energy. Emerson's message reached hundreds of thousands of people through writings and through lectures on the Lyceum circuit. Emerson celebrated the individual, who was liberated from social controls, but remained a self-disciplined and responsible member of society. So let's go to our next section and let's look at the influence of Emerson's literature. Emerson urged American writers to celebrate democracy and individual freedom and to find inspiration in the familiar. Henry David Thoreau heeded Emerson's call and turned to nature for inspiration. In 1854, he published Walden, or Life in the Woods. Thoreau became an advocate for social nonconformity and civil disobedience against unjust laws, both of which he practiced. Margaret Fuller, also a writer, began a transcendental discussion group for elite Boston women and published Woman in the 19th Century, which proclaimed that a new era was coming in the relations between men and women. Fuller believed that women, like men, had a mystical relationship with God and that every woman deserved psychological and social independence. In 1855, Walt Whitman, a teacher, journalist, and publicist for the Democratic Party, published the first edition of Leaves of Grass, which recorded his attempts to pass a number of invisible boundaries. Whitman did not seek isolation, but rather perfect communion with others. He celebrated democracy as well as himself, arguing that a poet could claim a profoundly intimate, mystical relationship with a mass audience. Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote The Scarlet Letter in 1850, and Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick in 1851, addressed the opposition between individuals and social order, discipline, and responsibility. Of all of these writers, American readers preferred the more modest examples of individualism offered by Emerson, who made personal improvement through spiritual awareness and self-discipline seem possible. Transcendentalists and other radical reformers also created ideal communities called utopias. The most important was a place called Brook Farm, founded in 1841, where members hoped to develop their minds and souls and then uplift society. The intellectual life at the farm was electric. All the major transcendentalists were residents or frequent visitors. Brook farmers supported themselves by selling goods from their farm, but organized their farming so that they remained independent of the market cycles. Brook Farm failed financially, and after a fire in 1846, the organizers disbanded and sold the farm. The Transcendentalists abandoned their attempts then to fashion a new social organization, yet their passion for individual freedom and social progress lived on in the movement to abolish slavery. So this does conclude video lecture number 36. Please answer the review questions at the bottom of the screen and continue on with your reading and your work.